Imagine a civilization so advanced that it made our modern world look primitive. A society with technology that defied the laws of physics as we understand them. Ships that could travel beneath the waves as easily as sailing on the surface. Buildings that scraped the very heavens themselves. A people who commanded the very elements, who could split mountains and redirect rivers with nothing more than their will and ancient knowledge passed down through millennia. Now imagine this entire civilization vanishing in a single day and night, swallowed by the earth and sea, as if the gods themselves had decided it was time for humanity's greatest achievement to be erased from history. Every trace of their existence obliterated, leaving behind only whispers and fragments of stories that would echo through time, becoming the foundation for humanity's most enduring mystery. This is the story of Atlantis, and before we dive deep into the abyss of this ancient enigma, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Because just like the lost city itself, our content has a way of disappearing into the algorithmic depths, and you might never find us again in the vast ocean of YouTube. For over 2 millennia, the story of Atlantis has captivated human imagination like no other tale. It has inspired countless books, movies, expeditions, and theories. Some dismiss it as pure fiction, a philosophical allegory created by one of history's greatest thinkers. Others believe it represents a real civilization, lost to time and catastrophe, waiting to be rediscovered beneath the waves or buried under tons of sediment and debris. But what if both perspectives are missing the point entirely? What if Atlantis was neither pure fiction nor a simple historical account, but something far more complex and significant? What if it was Plato's urgent warning to his own civilization, wrapped in the compelling narrative of a lost world, designed to shake his contemporaries out of their complacency and prevent them from suffering the same fate? The story begins in ancient Athens, around 360 BCE, in the philosophical dialogues of Plato, not with mystical visions or archaeological discoveries, but in the mind of one of humanity's most influential philosophers. Plato introduces Atlantis in 2 of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, through the voice of Critias the Elder, who claims to have heard the story from his grandfather, who in turn heard it from Solon, the famous Athenian lawgiver. According to this chain of oral tradition, Solon learned about Atlantis during his travels to Egypt, where ancient priests in the city of Sais shared with him records of a civilization that existed 9,000 years before their time. 9,000 years before Solon would place Atlantis around 9,600 BCE, a time when most of the world was still emerging from the last ice age, when hunter-gatherer societies were just beginning to experiment with agriculture, when the wheel hadn't even been invented. The priests told Solon that Athens itself was far older than the Greeks realized, and that their ancestors had once faced a mighty foe from beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. This enemy came from an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, an island that served as a stepping stone to other islands, forming a chain that reached all the way to a great continent on the far side of the Atlantic Ocean. The description Plato provides of Atlantis is remarkably detailed for what many consider a work of fiction. The main island was circular, divided into alternating rings of land and water, with a central citadel that housed the palace of Poseidon and the temple dedicated to the sea god. The rings were connected by bridges and tunnels, and the entire city was protected by elaborate defensive systems. The outer ring was 3 stadia in width, roughly 600 meters, filled with water that served as a harbor for the largest ships. The next ring of land was 2 stadia wide, followed by another ring of water 2 stadia wide, and finally an inner island 5 stadia in diameter, where the most sacred buildings stood. The precision of these measurements, the attention to engineering details, the careful consideration of defensive positions and trade routes, all suggest someone with deep knowledge of urban planning and military strategy. The Atlanteans themselves were described as descendants of Poseidon and a mortal woman named Plato. Poseidon divided the island among his 10 sons, with Atlas, the eldest, becoming the primary ruler, giving his name to both the island and the ocean that surrounded it. For generations, these kings ruled justly and wisely, following laws inscribed on a pillar of orichalcum, a mysterious metal that was said to be more precious than anything except gold. The society that emerged was unlike anything the ancient world had seen. The Atlanteans were master engineers who constructed an elaborate system of canals and waterways, turning their island into a maritime paradise. They built harbors that could accommodate the largest fleets, constructed bridges that spanned great distances, and developed technologies that allowed them to shape their environment to their will. Their military might was legendary. Plato describes an army of 120,000 infantry, 10,000 chariots, and 1,200 ships, numbers that would be impressive even by modern standards. But it wasn't just their numbers that made them formidable. It was their organization, their discipline, and their advanced weaponry and tactics. The Atlanteans controlled vast territories beyond their home island. Their influence extended across the Mediterranean, reaching as far as Egypt and Tyrrhenia, modern-day central Italy. They had established a network of colonies and trading posts that made them the dominant naval power of their age, controlling sea routes and exacting tribute from lesser civilizations. But perhaps most intriguingly, Plato describes their society as possessing knowledge and capabilities that seem almost supernatural by ancient standards. They had mastered metallurgy to such a degree that they could work with metals unknown to other civilizations. Their architecture defied conventional understanding, with buildings that seemed to rise impossibly high and structures that could withstand earthquakes and floods. Their understanding of agriculture allowed them to support a population far larger than should have been possible on an island. They had developed irrigation systems that could transform barren land into fertile fields, and their knowledge of animal husbandry had produced horses and elephants of extraordinary size and intelligence. Yet for all their achievements, for all their power and wealth, the Atlanteans were ultimately destroyed by their own success. Plato tells us that over time, their divine nature became diluted through intermarriage with mortals, and their character began to deteriorate. Where once they had been noble and just, they became greedy and corrupt. Where once they had been content with their prosperity, they became ambitious for conquest. The final straw came when they launched an invasion of the Mediterranean, seeking to enslave the entire region under their rule. Only Athens stood against them, fighting alone when all other cities had fallen or surrendered. In a remarkable display of courage and virtue, the Athenians defeated the Atlantean invaders, liberating the enslaved peoples and driving back the mighty empire. But their victory was short-lived. In a single day and night, the gods unleashed their wrath upon Atlantis. Earthquakes shook the island to its foundations, volcanoes erupted with unimaginable fury, and the sea rose up to swallow the entire civilization. When dawn broke, there was nothing left but an impassable muddy shoal where once the greatest city in the world had stood. This is the story as Plato tells it. But here's where things get interesting. Despite the incredible detail and the matter-of-fact way it's presented, no other ancient source mentions Atlantis. Not Homer, not Herodotus, not any of the other Greek historians or poets who recorded the myths and legends of their time. The first mention of Atlantis outside of Plato's dialogues doesn't appear until centuries later, when other philosophers began commenting on Plato's work. This silence has led many scholars to conclude that Atlantis was purely Plato's invention, a fictional device designed to illustrate philosophical points about ideal societies and the dangers of corruption and hubris. After all, Plato was known for using allegories and thought experiments to explore complex ideas. His allegory of the cave, his description of the ideal republic, his discussions of philosopher kings, all of these were clearly philosophical constructs rather than historical accounts. But if Atlantis was just a philosophical allegory, why did Plato go to such extraordinary lengths to establish its historical credibility? Why the elaborate chain of transmission from Solon to Critias? Why the specific dates and measurements? Why the detailed descriptions of geography, politics, and military organization? If he simply wanted to illustrate a point about the rise and fall of civilizations, surely a more obviously fictional framework would have been sufficient. Some scholars argue that the historical framing was essential to Plato's purpose. By presenting Atlantis as a real historical event, rather than an obvious fiction, he could make his warning more compelling and immediate. His audience, living in Athens at a time when their own city-state was experiencing the wealth and power that came with empire, needed to understand that the pattern of rise and fall wasn't just theoretical, it was historical and inevitable. Consider the context in which Plato was writing. Athens had recently emerged from the devastating Peloponnesian War, a conflict that had torn apart the Greek world and left Athens humbled and weakened. The city that had once led the fight against Persian tyranny, that had created the world's first democracy, that had produced unprecedented achievements in art, literature, and philosophy, had nearly destroyed itself through overreach and internal conflict. The parallels between Athens and Atlantis would not have been lost on Plato's readers. Both were powerful maritime civilizations. Both had established extensive empires through superior naval technology and organization. Both had grown wealthy through trade and tribute. Both had developed sophisticated political systems and achieved remarkable cultural heights. And both, according to Plato's narrative, were ultimately corrupted by their own success. The Athens of Plato's time was facing many of the same challenges that had supposedly destroyed Atlantis. The city was struggling with inequality, political instability, and moral decay. The democratic system that had once been Athens' greatest strength was being undermined by demagogues and special interests. The values that had made Athens great, courage, wisdom, justice, and moderation, were being abandoned in favor of wealth, power, and pleasure. In this context, the story of Atlantis reads less like ancient history and more like contemporary political commentary. The advanced technology, the vast wealth, the military dominance, the eventual corruption and fall, all of these elements would have resonated with Athenians who were living through their own version of imperial decline. But there's another layer to consider. What if Plato wasn't just commenting on his own time, but drawing on genuine historical memories, folk traditions, or even earlier written sources that have since been lost? The ancient world was full of stories about great floods, sunken cities, and lost civilizations. These narratives appear in cultures across the globe, from the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to flood myths in the Americas. Modern archaeology has revealed that such stories often contain kernels of historical truth. The excavation of Troy proved that Homer's epic poems, long considered pure fiction, were based on real places and events. The discovery of Minoan civilization on Crete showed that the Aegean had indeed been home to an advanced Bronze Age society that was destroyed by natural catastrophe. The ongoing work at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey has pushed back the timeline of human civilization by thousands of years, revealing that our ancestors were capable of far more sophisticated achievements than previously believed. Could Atlantis be based on memories of a real civilization, perhaps distorted and embellished through centuries of oral transmission, but ultimately rooted in historical fact? The timing that Plato provides, around 9600 BCE, coincides with the end of the last ice age, a period of dramatic climate change that saw sea levels rise by hundreds of feet as glaciers melted. Vast areas of land that had been habitable for thousands of years were suddenly submerged beneath the waves. During the Ice Age, much of what is now the ocean floor was dry land. The English Channel was a river valley. The Persian Gulf was a fertile plain. The Caribbean islands were connected by land bridges. If advanced civilizations had developed in these areas, they would have been completely obliterated when the ice sheets melted and the oceans rose. Recent underwater archaeology has revealed impressive structures beneath the waves in various parts of the world. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument presents what appears to be artificial terracing and architectural features carved from solid rock. Near the coast of India, sonar mapping has revealed structures that some interpret as the remains of ancient cities. In the Mediterranean, archaeologists have found evidence of Neolithic settlements now lying far beneath the surface. But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that Plato was drawing on Egyptian sources that contained genuine historical information. Ancient Egypt had a remarkably long and continuous historical tradition, with written records stretching back thousands of years. Egyptian priests were renowned throughout the ancient world for their knowledge of history and their careful preservation of ancient texts. Modern Egyptology has confirmed that the Egyptians had extensive knowledge of foreign lands and peoples, often recording information about distant civilizations with surprising accuracy. Their trade networks extended across Africa, into Asia, and throughout the Mediterranean. If a civilization like Atlantis had existed, it's entirely plausible that the Egyptians would have known about it and recorded its existence in their archives. Unfortunately, the vast majority of ancient Egyptian texts have been lost to time. The famous Library of Alexandria, which housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, was gradually depleted over centuries through accidents, wars, and neglect. Temple libraries throughout Egypt suffered similar fates. If records of Atlantis ever existed, they likely perished along with countless other irreplaceable historical documents. This brings us to one of the most frustrating aspects of the Atlantis mystery: the absence of archaeological evidence. If Atlantis was real, if it was as large and powerful as Plato describes, if it had extensive trade networks and military campaigns throughout the Mediterranean, where is the evidence? Where are the artifacts, the ruins, the traces of their influence on other civilizations? The standard archaeological response is that the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. If Atlantis had existed, we should have found something by now. The Mediterranean has been extensively explored, mapped, and excavated. Ancient trade routes have been traced, shipwrecks have been discovered and analyzed, and the material culture of every known ancient civilization has been studied in detail. The fact that no Atlantean artifacts have ever been identified suggests that no such civilization ever existed. But this argument has some significant weaknesses. First, it assumes that we would recognize Atlantean artifacts if we found them. If Atlantis existed in 9600 BCE, its material culture would be completely different from anything we associate with known ancient civilizations. Their technology, their art, their methods of construction, all of these would be alien to our expectations based on later historical periods. Second, it underestimates the destructive power of natural forces and human activity over thousands of years. If Atlantis was destroyed by earthquakes and flooding, as Plato describes, the physical evidence might be buried under tons of sediment scattered across vast areas of the ocean floor, or broken down into unrecognizable fragments by erosion and chemical action. Third, it assumes that archaeologists have been looking in the right places. The search for Atlantis has focused primarily on the Mediterranean and Eastern Atlantic, based on Plato's reference to the Pillars of Hercules. But what if the location clues in Plato's account are wrong, or symbolic rather than literal? What if Atlantis was located somewhere completely different? Over the years, researchers have proposed dozens of alternative locations for Atlantis. Some have suggested it was located in the Black Sea, which was indeed flooded at the end of the Ice Age when rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosphorus. Others have placed it in the North Sea, which was also dry land during the Ice Age and was gradually submerged as glaciers melted. More exotic theories have placed Atlantis in the Pacific Ocean, in the Caribbean, in the Sahara Desert when it was still green and fertile, or even in Antarctica before it was covered by ice. Each of these theories has its supporters and its evidence, though none has achieved widespread acceptance in the academic community. Perhaps the most scientifically rigorous approach to the Atlantis question has been taken by researchers who focus on the geological and environmental aspects of Plato's account. If Atlantis was destroyed by earthquakes and flooding, there should be evidence of such catastrophic events in the geological record. The end of the last ice age was indeed a time of dramatic environmental change. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose, many areas experienced increased seismic activity. The additional weight of water on the ocean floor and the removal of ice from continental areas caused significant adjustments in the Earth's crust. Volcanic activity increased in many regions, and massive landslides occurred both on land and underwater. Some researchers have suggested that what Plato described as the destruction of Atlantis might actually be a folk memory of these real environmental catastrophes. The story of a great civilization being destroyed by earthquakes and floods might be a mythologized account of the very real disasters that befell coastal communities as the Ice Age ended. This interpretation gains some support from similar flood myths found in cultures around the world. The biblical account of Noah's flood, the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, the Hindu Puranas, the Native American traditions of the Pacific Northwest, all describe great floods that destroyed earlier civilizations. While these are often dismissed as purely mythological, they might actually preserve memories of real events from the end of the Ice Age. But even if we accept that Plato's account might be based on real environmental events, this doesn't prove that Atlantis itself was real. The story might be Plato's creative interpretation of folk memories about ancient floods, combined with his own philosophical agenda and literary imagination. This brings us back to the central question: was Atlantis Plato's warning or ancient reality? The truth is, we may never know for certain. The evidence is ambiguous, the sources are limited, and the passage of time has obscured whatever facts might once have been available. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Perhaps the enduring mystery of Atlantis is more valuable than any definitive answer could be. The story serves as a mirror in which each generation sees its own hopes, fears, and challenges reflected. For Plato's contemporaries, it was a warning about the dangers of imperial overreach and moral decay. For later civilizations, it has been a symbol of lost golden ages, advanced ancient wisdom, or the hubris of technological civilization. In our own time, when we face unprecedented global challenges, when our own civilization seems to teeter on the edge of environmental and social collapse, the story of Atlantis takes on new relevance. Whether it was real or fictional, it reminds us that no civilization, no matter how advanced or powerful, is guaranteed to survive. The same forces that create greatness, ambition, innovation, the desire to expand and dominate, can also lead to destruction. The Atlanteans, according to Plato, were destroyed not by external enemies or natural disasters alone, but by their own moral failure. They became so focused on material wealth and power that they lost sight of the values that had made them great in the first place. They confused might with right, success with virtue, and dominance with achievement. This moral dimension of the Atlantis story is often overlooked in favor of speculation about advanced technology or lost continents. But it may be the most important aspect of the entire narrative. Plato wasn't primarily interested in geography or archaeology. He was concerned with ethics and politics. The rise and fall of Atlantis was meant to illustrate fundamental truths about human nature and social organization. The advanced technology of the Atlanteans, their engineering marvels and military might, were not presented as admirable achievements, but as symptoms of a civilization that had lost its way. Their ability to reshape their environment, to dominate other peoples, to accumulate vast wealth, all of these were signs of power without wisdom, capability without character. In this reading, Atlantis serves as a cautionary tale about the relationship between technological advancement and moral development. The Atlanteans had achieved incredible material progress, but they had failed to achieve corresponding progress in ethics and spirituality. They had learned to control the external world, but had lost control of themselves. This interpretation of Atlantis has particular resonance in our current historical moment. We live in an age of unprecedented technological capability, with powers that would seem godlike to our ancestors. We can communicate instantly across vast distances, travel to other continents in hours, manipulate matter at the atomic level, and even edit the genetic code of life itself. Yet for all our technological prowess, we seem increasingly unable to solve our fundamental social and environmental problems. We have the knowledge and resources to eliminate poverty, to prevent environmental degradation, to reduce conflict and suffering. But we lack the wisdom and will to implement these solutions effectively. Like the Atlanteans, we may be in danger of being destroyed by our own success. Our technological achievements have given us power over nature that we may not be mature enough to handle responsibly. Our economic systems reward short-term thinking and competitive advantage over long-term sustainability and collective welfare. Our political institutions seem unable to address challenges that transcend national boundaries and partisan interests. The story of Atlantis reminds us that technological advancement without corresponding moral development is not progress, but a recipe for disaster. The same capabilities that allow us to build great civilizations can also destroy them if they are not guided by wisdom, justice, and restraint. But the story also offers hope. The Athenians in Plato's narrative were able to resist the Atlantean invasion despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned. They succeeded not because they had superior technology or greater wealth, but because they fought for justice rather than conquest, for freedom rather than domination. Their victory demonstrated that moral strength could triumph over material power. This aspect of the story is often forgotten in discussions about Atlantis, but it may be the most important lesson Plato was trying to convey. The real heroes of the narrative are not the technologically advanced Atlanteans, but the virtuous Athenians who stood against tyranny despite overwhelming odds. In our own time, we face challenges that seem as daunting as those faced by Plato's fictional Athenians. Climate change, inequality, political polarization, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, all of these problems seem to require solutions that are beyond our current capabilities. It's tempting to despair, to assume that our civilization is doomed to follow the same path as Atlantis. But the story suggests a different possibility. It implies that civilizations are not destroyed by external forces alone, but by their own choices. The Atlanteans were not victims of inevitable historical processes. They were architects of their own destruction. Their downfall resulted from specific decisions about how to use their power, what values to prioritize, and what kind of society to create. This means that different choices could lead to different outcomes. If we can learn from the mistakes of the Atlanteans, both real and fictional, we might be able to avoid their fate. If we can develop wisdom to match our technological capabilities, if we can prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term gain, if we can choose cooperation over competition and justice over power, we might be able to create a civilization that is both advanced and sustainable. The enduring appeal of the Atlantis story suggests that this hope resonates across cultures and centuries. People continue to search for Atlantis not just because they want to discover ancient ruins or advanced technology, but because they want to believe that human civilization can achieve greatness without self-destruction. They want proof that it's possible to combine material progress with moral development, technological advancement with spiritual wisdom. Whether or not Atlantis ever existed as a physical place, it exists as an idea, a symbol of both human potential and human fallibility. It represents our highest aspirations and our deepest fears about what we might become. In searching for Atlantis, we are really searching for ourselves, for answers to fundamental questions about the nature of civilization and the possibilities of human development. The question of whether Atlantis was Plato's warning or ancient reality may ultimately be less important than the question of what we choose to do with the story. Do we use it as inspiration for continued searching for lost civilizations and ancient mysteries? Do we treat it as a philosophical text with important lessons about power and corruption? Do we see it as a mirror that reflects our own civilization's strengths and weaknesses? Perhaps the most productive approach is to embrace all of these interpretations simultaneously. The scientific search for evidence of ancient civilizations continues to reveal new information about human history and capabilities. Archaeological discoveries regularly push back the timeline of human achievement and reveal that our ancestors were more sophisticated than previously believed. Even if these discoveries never prove the existence of Atlantis specifically, they expand our understanding of what was possible in the ancient world. At the same time, the philosophical dimensions of the Atlantis story remain as relevant as ever. The themes of hubris and nemesis, of power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely, of the need to balance material progress with moral development, all of these continue to resonate in our contemporary context. The story also serves as a reminder of the fragility of civilization itself. The achievements that we take for granted, the institutions and technologies that seem permanent and unshakable, are actually quite vulnerable to disruption and collapse. History is littered with the remains of societies that seemed invincible in their day, but vanished when they could no longer adapt to changing circumstances. This fragility is not necessarily a cause for despair, but rather a call to vigilance and wisdom. If we understand that our civilization is not guaranteed to survive, if we recognize that our actions today will determine whether future generations inherit a world of abundance or scarcity, cooperation or conflict, sustainability or collapse, then we might be more motivated to make the difficult choices necessary to ensure a positive outcome. The Atlantis story, whether historical or fictional, provides a framework for thinking about these choices. It asks us to consider what kind of civilization we want to build, what values we want to prioritize, and what legacy we want to leave for future generations. It challenges us to learn from the mistakes of the past, both real and imagined, and to use that knowledge to create a better future. In the end, the search for Atlantis is really a search for wisdom. It's an attempt to understand the forces that shape human civilization, the patterns that govern the rise and fall of societies, and the choices that determine whether technological advancement leads to flourishing or destruction. Whether we find this wisdom in ancient ruins beneath the waves, in philosophical dialogues written thousands of years ago, or in our own careful observation of contemporary events, the goal remains the same: to learn how to build and maintain civilizations worthy of our highest aspirations. But perhaps there's another dimension to this mystery that we haven't fully explored. What if the search for Atlantis has revealed something even more profound than the existence or non-existence of a single lost civilization? What if it has shown us that the capacity for advanced civilization has always existed within humanity, waiting for the right conditions to emerge? Consider the implications of recent archaeological discoveries that have revolutionized our understanding of ancient human capabilities. The complex stone circles of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dating back over 11,000 years, demonstrate that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of organizing massive construction projects, requiring sophisticated planning, specialized labor, and abstract symbolic thinking. These monuments were built by people who weren't supposed to have developed such capabilities for thousands of years, according to traditional archaeological timelines. The underwater ruins off the coast of Japan, the megalithic structures scattered across remote islands in the Pacific, the precisely cut stone blocks found in various parts of the world that seem to defy explanation based on known ancient technologies, all of these discoveries suggest that our ancestors were far more accomplished than we have traditionally believed. They may not prove the existence of Atlantis specifically, but they demonstrate that the kind of advanced ancient civilization Plato described is not beyond the realm of possibility. This raises a fascinating question. If humans have always possessed the intellectual capacity for advanced civilization, why did it take so long for complex societies to develop and spread? The traditional answer has been that technological and social evolution is a gradual process, that each generation builds incrementally on the achievements of the previous one. That progress is linear and predictable. But what if progress isn't linear at all? What if human civilization has always been subject to cycles of advancement and regression, periods of flowering followed by collapse and forgetting? What if the story of Atlantis, whether literally true or not, represents a pattern that has repeated throughout human history, with advanced civilizations rising and falling while leaving only fragmentary traces of their existence? This cyclical view of history was actually common in ancient times. The Greeks believed in ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, with each age representing a decline from the previous one. The Hindus conceived of vast cosmic cycles in which civilizations rose and fell over millions of years. The Maya developed complex calendrical systems that tracked multiple overlapping cycles of time, including great cycles that marked the rise and fall of entire world ages. Modern Western civilization, with its faith in perpetual progress and linear development, tends to dismiss such cyclical views as primitive superstition. But what if our ancestors understood something about the nature of historical change that we have forgotten? What if the belief in inevitable progress is actually the anomaly and cycles of rise and fall are the norm? There is growing evidence from various fields of study that supports a more cyclical view of human development. Climate science has revealed that the Earth's climate system operates in complex cycles, with periods of stability alternating with periods of rapid change. These climate cycles have profoundly influenced human history, enabling the development of agriculture and civilization during stable periods while triggering migrations, conflicts, and collapses during periods of rapid change. Evolutionary biology has shown that the development of life itself follows cyclical patterns, with periods of gradual change punctuated by mass extinctions and rapid evolutionary innovation. The history of individual species often follows boom and bust cycles, with populations expanding rapidly under favorable conditions before crashing when resources become scarce or environmental conditions change. Economic history reveals similar patterns, with periods of growth and prosperity alternating with recessions, depressions, and financial collapses. Technological development sometimes follows exponential curves of advancement, but it can also experience plateaus, setbacks, and even periods of technological regression when civilizations decline. If these cyclical patterns operate at multiple levels of existence, from climate to biology to economics to technology, it would be surprising if human civilization were exempt from such cycles. The story of Atlantis, in this context, becomes not just a tale about one particular lost civilization, but an archetypal narrative about the rise and fall of civilizations in general. This perspective helps explain some of the puzzling aspects of the Atlantis story. The advanced technology that Plato attributes to the Atlanteans might not be pure fantasy, but rather a garbled memory of real technological achievements from an earlier cycle of civilization. The precise dates and measurements might preserve fragments of actual historical information transmitted through oral tradition and distorted over time, but retaining some connection to real events. The moral dimension of the story also makes more sense from a cyclical perspective. If civilizations naturally tend to rise and fall, then the factors that contribute to this process become crucial to understand. The corruption and hubris that Plato identifies as the causes of Atlantis's destruction might be recurring patterns that appear in every civilization as it reaches the peak of its power and begins to decline. This interpretation suggests that the story of Atlantis is not just ancient history or philosophical allegory, but a practical guide for recognizing and potentially avoiding the patterns that lead to civilizational collapse. By understanding how and why Atlantis fell, we might be able to prevent our own civilization from following the same path. But this raises an even more challenging question. If civilizational cycles are natural and inevitable, is it even possible to avoid decline and collapse? Or are we doomed to repeat the same patterns over and over again, like actors in a cosmic drama playing out the same tragic script across the ages? Some thinkers have suggested that the answer lies in consciousness and awareness. If previous civilizations declined because they were unconscious of the cyclical patterns governing their development, then perhaps a civilization that becomes fully aware of these patterns might be able to transcend them. By understanding the forces that lead to rise and fall, by recognizing the warning signs of corruption and decline, by deliberately choosing wisdom over power and sustainability over short-term gain, we might be able to break out of the cycle entirely. This is where the search for Atlantis takes on profound contemporary relevance. If Atlantis represents a previous cycle of civilization that failed to transcend the patterns of rise and fall, then our task is not just to find physical evidence of its existence, but to understand the deeper lessons it offers about the nature of civilizational development. The technology that the Atlanteans supposedly possessed, their mastery over natural forces, their ability to shape their environment according to their will, all of these capabilities are becoming available to our own civilization. We are developing powers over matter and energy that would seem magical to our ancestors. We are learning to manipulate genetic codes, to create artificial intelligence, to harness the fundamental forces of nature. But are we developing the wisdom to use these powers responsibly? Are we learning to balance technological advancement with moral development? Are we paying attention to the warning signs that indicate when a civilization is moving from healthy growth toward destructive excess? The environmental crisis that confronts our civilization bears striking similarities to the ecological collapse that supposedly destroyed Atlantis. According to Plato's account, the Atlanteans' manipulation of their environment eventually exceeded the natural system's capacity to sustain such intervention. Their engineering projects, their expansion of agriculture, their exploitation of natural resources all contributed to an environmental breakdown that made their civilization vulnerable to catastrophic collapse. Our own civilization faces similar challenges. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, resource depletion, all of these represent ways in which our technological capabilities have begun to overwhelm natural systems. Like the mythical Atlanteans, we have gained tremendous power over our environment, but we may be using that power in ways that undermine the very foundations of our civilization. The social and political parallels are equally striking. The corruption and moral decay that Plato identifies as key factors in Atlantis's decline are evident in many aspects of contemporary society. The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, the erosion of civic virtue and public spirit, the prioritization of short-term gain over long-term sustainability, the use of advanced technology for surveillance and control rather than liberation and empowerment, all of these trends echo the patterns that supposedly led to Atlantis's destruction. But there are also reasons for hope. Unlike previous civilizations, we have the benefit of historical perspective. We can study the rise and fall of past civilizations and learn from their successes and failures. We have developed scientific methods for understanding natural and social systems that allow us to recognize problems before they become catastrophic. We have created global communication networks that make it possible to coordinate responses to planetary challenges. Most importantly, we have the story of Atlantis itself, whether as historical fact or philosophical parable, to remind us of the dangers we face and the choices we must make. The tale serves as a mirror in which we can see our own civilization's trajectory and consciously choose to alter course if necessary. The search for the physical remains of Atlantis continues to yield fascinating discoveries that expand our understanding of ancient human capabilities. Underwater archaeologists are mapping submerged landscapes that were once inhabited by our ancestors. Satellite technology is revealing hidden structures and ancient settlement patterns. Advanced dating techniques are pushing back the timeline of human civilization and showing that our ancestors achieved remarkable things much earlier than previously believed. But perhaps the most important discoveries are not archaeological, but psychological and spiritual. The enduring fascination with Atlantis reveals something profound about human nature itself. We are creatures who dream of perfection while struggling with our own limitations, beings who aspire to transcendence while remaining rooted in material existence, civilizations that reach for the stars while grappling with earthbound problems. The story of Atlantis gives form and narrative structure to these fundamental tensions in human experience. It allows us to explore questions about the relationship between power and responsibility, between individual achievement and collective welfare, between technological progress and spiritual development, in a safe imaginative space where the consequences are literary rather than literal. Yet the literary consequences have real-world implications. The way we interpret the story of Atlantis influences how we understand our own civilization's trajectory and possibilities. If we see it primarily as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and excess, we might be motivated to exercise greater restraint and wisdom in our use of technology and power. If we see it as evidence of ancient advanced civilizations, we might be inspired to explore new possibilities for human achievement and organization. If we see it as a cyclical pattern that all civilizations must follow, we might focus on understanding the deeper forces that govern rise and fall, seeking to transcend the cycle through greater consciousness and wisdom. If we see it as a call to heroism, we might be motivated to emulate the Athenians who stood against seemingly impossible odds in defense of justice and freedom. All of these interpretations have value, and none need exclude the others. The richness and complexity of the Atlantis story allows it to operate simultaneously as historical speculation, philosophical allegory, spiritual metaphor, and practical guide. Its enduring power lies precisely in this multidimensional quality, its ability to speak to different aspects of human experience and different levels of understanding. As we continue to grapple with the challenges facing our own civilization, the story of Atlantis offers both inspiration and warning. It reminds us that human beings are capable of extraordinary achievements, that we can create societies of great beauty, wisdom, and technological sophistication. But it also warns us that these achievements are fragile, that they can be lost through moral failure, environmental collapse, or simple neglect. The choice between these outcomes is not predetermined by natural law or historical inevitability. It depends on the decisions we make, individually and collectively, about how to use our power and how to organize our societies. The story of Atlantis, whether historical truth or philosophical fiction, is ultimately a story about the power of choice and the responsibility that comes with capability. In this sense, we are all citizens of Atlantis. We all participate in a civilization that possesses unprecedented power over the natural world and tremendous potential for both creation and destruction. We all face the choice between wisdom and folly, between justice and oppression, between sustainability and excess. The fate of our civilization, like the fate of mythical Atlantis, hangs in the balance of these choices. The mystery of Atlantis endures because it speaks to something fundamental in human nature. We are creatures capable of both incredible achievement and spectacular failure, beings who can create wonders and destroy them with equal facility. The story reminds us that our greatest enemy is not external forces beyond our control, but our own capacity for self-deception and self-destruction. But it also reminds us of our capacity for heroism and wisdom. The Athenians who stood against the Atlantean invasion, the philosophers who used the story to teach important lessons about power and virtue, the generations of seekers who have kept the story alive and continued to learn from it, all represent the better angels of human nature. The search for Atlantis has become a search for ourselves, for our origins and our destiny, for our potential and our purpose. Whether we find sunken ruins beneath the waves or profound truths within ancient texts, whether we discover advanced technologies or timeless wisdom, the quest itself transforms us. It challenges us to think more deeply about the nature of civilization, to question our assumptions about progress and development, to consider possibilities that lie beyond the boundaries of conventional thinking. In pursuing the mystery of Atlantis, we are really pursuing the mystery of human consciousness itself. What are we capable of achieving? What are the limits of our knowledge and power? What is our proper relationship to the natural world and to each other? How can we create societies that honor both individual potential and collective welfare? How can we balance the drive for progress with the need for stability and sustainability? These are the questions that the story of Atlantis poses, whether we encounter it as historical speculation, philosophical allegory, or spiritual metaphor. They are also the questions that our own civilization must answer if we are to avoid the fate that befell the mythical Atlanteans and create a future worthy of our highest aspirations. As we face the challenges of our own time, as we grapple with questions about technology and morality, power and responsibility, progress and sustainability, the story of Atlantis offers both warning and hope. It warns us about the dangers of hubris and the corruption of power, but it also suggests that these dangers can be overcome through wisdom, courage, and commitment to justice. Whether Atlantis was Plato's warning or ancient reality, it is ultimately our story. It reflects our dreams and fears, our potential for greatness and our capacity for folly. In telling and retelling this story, in searching for its meaning and its truth, we are really exploring the deepest questions about human nature and human destiny. The waves that swallowed Atlantis may have erased a great civilization from the face of the earth, but they could not erase the idea of Atlantis from human consciousness. That idea continues to inspire and challenge us, to remind us of what we might achieve and what we might lose, to call us to be worthy of the power we possess and the possibilities before us. In the vast ocean of human history, Atlantis remains both a beacon and a warning, guiding us toward wisdom while alerting us to the shoals of destruction. Whether we reach safe harbor or join the lost city beneath the waves depends on the choices we make and the lessons we choose to learn. The story of Atlantis is not yet finished. We are still writing it, and the ending remains ours to determine.